Everybody. We've been using variables to pass data around our spells, but we really haven't talked about them that much. So I know for a lot of folks that variables can be a confusing term, and my goal for the next couple of minutes is to make them make sense for you in the context of Respell. So first, what is a variable? Well, I'm going to go back into our company compliance spell, and we're going to take a look at the variables inside of it. So we have three that we're defining: the company name and the company website and the compliance frameworks. And these are all different types. You can see this one's a plain text. This one is a link, URL, and then this one is a list of plain text. And so we can see those are GDPR, SOC 2, HIPAA, ISO, etc. And so when we are passing data two different steps in our spell, we're using those same variables that we defined from the previous step in the next one. So in this case, in the research agent, we're putting in the company name, domain, and the compliance frameworks. Now, you don't need to pass variables along the line. Some blocks are going to give you a lot of different variables to work with, and you don't need to also put them right next to in the directly afterwards step. And so in this case, we have a display step here, which is getting the summary from the generate text with AI step right here, but we're also getting the research report from the research agent. So variables are always available, and the quick tip for you when you're wondering whether you can use a variable on a certain step is if you can draw a line back to the step that you want to get a variable from, you can probably use it because that means it ran before, and those are guaranteed to be output before. Now, I want to get into some of the trickier stuff with a bit of a contrived example. We're going to go back to our demos, and I've made the spell variables and types. And we have three different inputs here. So we have a date input. This is a date type. You can tell because it's a date picker. It says choose a date. And if I put that as like July 31st, it just snaps it in right there. And then we also have an image input, and we have an object input as well. An object is a collection of different fields. So think of them as like sub inputs as well, but they're all part of one thing that you can access and pass around together. And so a lot of integrations are going to use these. For example, if you're working with a CRM, you might get a contact object. If you're working with an ATS, applicant tracking system, you'll get a candidate or a job opening object as well. And those are each going to have many different fields sometimes. So in this case, I just have one fake contact object with an email, last name, and a first name. Now, if I go into the editor, then I want to show you a few things. You can see we have our three inputs here, and I'm going to go through each of these flows step by step. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was how do you get a type like a image converted to text? Well, if you think like generally about images, there's no clear way to go from image to text. There's really two things I can think of, which is you get the text out of an image, and then you also can describe or ask a question about an image. So if you upload an image of a giraffe, maybe it should tell you that, hey, this is an image of a giraffe. So that would be the semantic representation, and then the extracting text is the other one. In this case, I'm using describe image to put in the image input right here in the image step, and then we have a question. This is just a default to describe the image. And what we're getting out here is a response. Now the response you can see is a plain text because it has that like the lines as the icon, and we're passing that into a display step so you can see it when we run this. And this is a plain text that comes out, so it matches the old one, and the value is just a response from that step. Now, a very important lesson to keep in mind is when you are passing a variable from step to step, you got to try your best to make sure that the types match. And we're going to do our best to show you the icon, but sometimes, like for example, I could pass in a date input into here. And what it's going to do, it says right down here, variable type mismatch. We're going to try our best to, in the background, convert that variable to text for you. But in the case where we can't, it might either error or throw or give you some weird value. So just keep in mind, whenever you see this show up, that you should watch out and make sure that's really what you want to do. All right, so that's that. I'm going to remove this before I forget. Great. And the next thing I want to talk about is converters. Now, when you're working with variables, you don't always want to have to do the tiny little things by adding a whole other step for it. So for example, you might want to reformat a certain type. So for a date type, you may want to only get the day of the week, the day of the month, just a year out of it, stuff like that. Or you may want to convert it to or do a transformation on that variable. So for example, for a true or false field, you may want to do the opposite, or you may want to, for an integer field, round it up or round it down, or get the nearest integer, stuff like that. So in this case, what we're doing is first I want to show you when we have a date that we're just displaying it out here. I showed you last time I could put in the image in the plain text field and we could try to convert it. Might not do a good job. But in this case, we have a date input. I want to just display that back to us. So I'm going to use the date type here in the display step, and then I'm going to pass it in directly. And then for using a converter, let's say we wanted the day of the week. Then what I would do is I would give it a label, day of the week, and then I would say, okay, I want a date input. I would put that in there. So I'll show you what it looks like when I put it in directly. And you can see I got, again, the variable type mismatch because it's a date in a plain text field. But I also have this arrow drop down here. And so I can say, oh, I want the ISO or UTC format. I want maybe just the year. Maybe I just want the day or the month or the day of the week. In this case, I wanted the day of the week. So when I click that, it's applying a converter so that every time the spell runs, before it actually does what the step is supposed to do, it's going to convert that date input into just the day of the week. And so we'll see what that gives us in a moment. And one thing to know here is when you do this, it's no longer a date. You don't have that whole date. You just have the day of the week now. So I'm going to make this a plain text, and then this is totally valid. So that's how converters work. And there's a couple different types. There's ones, like I mentioned, that can format things differently. That's what we're doing here. You can transform a variable into different values, which is what we're doing here. And then you can also, for objects, there's a special converter called field accessor. So I'm going to show you what that looks like right here. If I go into the display step, let's say, remember we had this contact object with 3 different fields with email, last name, and first name. Well, if I want to only get the email out of it, then what I could do is this. I could just make a label, contact email, and then put in the value here as the contact object input. And then I would have this such transformations here. Whoops. And then I also have fields. I can just select the email out of it. So that's pretty much how you work with variables. Now, when you are working with triggers, most often they're going to give you back objects. So you're going to want to use those objects with converters to get a value out. All right, so let's run this now and see what it gives us. I'm going to select a date. I was talking about giraffes earlier, so I'm going to just upload a giraffe. Wait for it to upload, and then I'm going to click test. And we should see here, there we go, we've got the date and the day of the week. So remember, this one we did not apply a converter to, so this is just like the whole date returned as text. And then the day of the week we applied a converter to, so it's 3. And then contact email right there. There we go. So I got the email directly from the object, and then I got the image description out. So that's how converters work. Again, it ran before this display step ran. So it converted it right before it did its actual function, which is displaying values back. So hopefully this video provided a bit more clarity on working with variables. To recap, you can sometimes use a step to convert variables, or you can just use converters if there's one available. 2 is try to make sure that your variables will match whatever option you're putting them into. Most of the issues with, hey, my step isn't working, ends up being that you might be passing the wrong variable type into an option. So just keep that in mind when you're working through your spells. So once you've mastered these, you'll be able to zip through the editor like a pro. It definitely is one of the hardest parts of Respell. And we're always on the lookout for helpful converters. So shoot any ideas our way in the Slack community, and I will see you next video.